Welcome to If I Only Had 10 Minutes. I'm Jane Randall, one of the partners in Comms Collective, and I'm here with Craig Minassian. Craig, welcome.
Hi, Jane. A pleasure to be here.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, currently I serve as the Chief Content Communications and Marketing Officer for the Clinton Foundation and the Clinton Global Initiative and the work that President Clinton, Secretary Clinton, and Chelsea Clinton do. I also own a small media agency called Minassian Media, which I've had for about 18 years, where we represent a wide range of corporate, very large international nonprofit and entertainment clients, really at the intersection of content and communications. And previously, I was at HBO on the creative side and served in the White House and the communications office on various campaigns and other jobs along the way, including on the World Cup organizing committee in '94. So,
Well, I'm so glad you're here. Thank you so much. Let's start with a softball question or snowball. Um, what should today's comms leaders be focused on right now?
it's a great question. I think that at the moment, we sort of have to ask our question, what am I missing? What don't I know? Obviously, the landscape has changed so much about how we communicate, the platforms we use to communicate, where people get their information. So constantly asking ourselves, what am I missing? I think is a critical question that starts every conversation. And what's the goal? Who's the audience? How do you reach them all? As part of that as well.
Right, right. It's interesting. I had a conversation with a bunch of comms people the other day, and it was sort of where do you get your news? And I think triangulating was sort of the answer, right? I look here and I look here and I look here, and then I figure out what I think is, sort of right. So
Well, and I
it's
think there's an element of that for those of us like you and I who've been in this industry for a long time. There are news sources and information sources that we've grown up with. That could be cable news, it could be major newspapers that are radically changed.
yeah,
And making sure we have that mind shift and making sure we have people around us. Sometimes that's in your home with kids, sometimes it's in the workplace, and really understanding where they get their
right.
information and news. And those aren't always the same. And so that, goes back to what I was saying before, is we have to ask ourselves, what are we missing? Because um, the old ways of getting your message out and it landing keep changing. I mean,
Yes,
they keep changing radically. I mean,
yes.
who would have thought that we would all have the ability to do this, have podcasts that are part of, you know, now part of our jobs.
So to your point, who are you trying to reach is really critical. I mean, some people get their news from TikTok.
We work with the Daily Show, and Jordan Klepper loves to talk about how fans will come up to him, and depending on their age, they'll say, "I love watching your show," or "I love your content," or "I love your clips."
So
And
interesting. I will say I'm a big Jordan Klepper fan. Just saying. Because we're Comps Collective, we like to ask about fractional. So, fractional, when we first started, fractional, no one knew what it was. I'm still not convinced people wholly understand it. But now, if you look on LinkedIn, everyone who isn't in a corporate job is fractional. So, how do you see this shift, the change for fractional from niche to normal, changing the comms industry?
yeah, I think it's a really important idea, and to embrace it is incredibly useful because as the comms industry has become more complex, and sometimes within an organization, there's a whole project or function that requires a different level of expertise that you may not have, and a level of attention in terms of really being integrated with the team that an agency may not give you. So
Mm-hmm.
that's just one application of being able to access that expertise. And then because the comms function has become so much more important, and finding the leader for that part of the organization can either take time or, someone is out of the job for a good reason, such as parental leave, being able to fill it with someone who brings that same level of experience and maybe a fresh perspective is a really important consideration. And that's where I think fractional really plays an important role.
When do you think comms leaders need to push back harder than they usually do?
Well, that's a case. Really, I think there are often times where, and we've all been in this situation where someone just wants to plow through something. They can have blinders on about how something may actually land or what you
Right.
need to do to get the land the right way. And you really have to be aggressive in standing up for your point of view and helping your client, if that could be an internal client, external client,
Sure.
understand the real full picture of how something might land and all the factors. Um, President Clinton often talks about in a very positive way that we should pay attention to trend lines and not just headlines. And I find that headlines, it's good comms advice because, well, he always has good strategy and communications advice, but headlines can be a little of that sugar high, and headlines definitely drive the day, but the trend lines are what makes an impact over time. And so keeping both factors of your strategy in mind while you're advising someone um, is really critical. And that's where you need to be aggressive and say, don't forget about this. Or
Right.
if we do this, this may be a potential outcome.
Right. Right. I will say one of the questions that we ask a lot is, who's the best communicator you've ever seen, and I will say President Clinton has come up quite a bit. Um, and having had the privilege of meeting him, he's remarkable, actually.
It's always a masterclass and with Secretary Clinton as well in um, really bringing ideas into language and a way to talk about it that connects with people and is very accessible.
Yes.
Those are just two of the many um, lessons that we've learned from him. But I'll say that throughout my career at places like HBO, for example, understanding that the while it's not particularly communications advice, I've applied it, and I think all good communicators apply it to communications efforts. Is what is a compelling narrative. I always tell our teams, if whatever you're doing, it could be a film, it could be a new initiative that you're launching at your company. If you have compelling characters, if you have stakes that people understand and care about, if you have conflict and a ticking clock, you have the basis for a really good communications plans. And that conflict can be anything. I mean,
Right.
in a sitcom, sometimes that conflict is, will the lead characters get together or not? Sometimes in, a video game, that might be conflict where you're playing a war simulation.
Right. Right.
Um, in a business setting, that conflict can be how what you're doing is overcoming a problem, creating a new solution, meeting a challenge, meeting a business challenge. In the nonprofit space, it can be the race against time against climate change.
Sure.
So to really think about those elements, who's going to tell your story? What's the story you're trying to tell? Why should people care about it right now? And what happens if this doesn't happen?
Right.
Um, I learned that from some of the greatest communicators in the world who are writing the characters and the stories
Yes.
that we
Yes.
choose to tune into, you know, uh, for entertainment
Yes.
and apply that across the board.
Frankly, I think a lot of the late night hosts um, are really, obviously that's their jobs, but they're just really good communicators of information. You know, humor is so important, right? And it's such a good way to get things across because it's not intimidating at all.
I think they have the benefit, and why I still think comedy has such an important and perhaps more important role in society is to do stand up and to be in a situation where you have a live audience, including the late night shows, and getting that feedback that is so much different than online and the conversations on platforms. The real time feedback, seeing how it lands with people, seeing what generates a laugh, and often that's because there's a human understanding of what the comedian, what John or Steven or Jimmy are saying, because it resonates, and that's the honest part of comedy that makes it such an important part of you
Right.
know reflecting on what's happening in the world.
Right. Okay. Last question. Although we did miss one you're gonna have to come back because there's one I really want to ask you. Um, if you had an extra 10 minutes in your day, what would you do?
If I had an extra 10 minutes in the day, I would do more creative writing.
Have you published?
I haven't published a book. I've had TV shows that I've, been part of that have aired, but yeah, I would love to write a book. If I had the time to do it, that's what
All right, so
I
do
would
it in 10
focus on.
minutes a day. 10 minutes a day. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It's so fun to talk to you. And I have so many more questions for you, so you're coming back, whether you want to or not.
Yeah, I would love it. Thank you,
All
Jane.
right,
Great to
bye.
talk to you.
Bye.